What's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to take a look at and set up React Admin, which is technically a front-end framework for building apps that run in the browser on top of a REST API or a GraphQL API. So it gives you this interface to list all your resources, whether it's blog posts or products or users, whatever it might be. And it lists them out. You can edit, you can delete, you can create a new resource. So it's really cool. And it uses a data provider. So if we look at the code down here, we bring in admin from React Admin and we render that, pass in a data provider. Now you can actually create your own data provider. It's basically a way to interpret the data that's coming in, but we're just going to use the REST provider from this package here, which is called RA data-simple-rest. So that's this right here. It's a simple REST data provider for React Admin. So we are going to use that. Now, as far as your backend, in reality, you'd probably have something like an Express server with MongoDB or Postgres as a database, or you could use Laravel or Django or .NET. It doesn't really matter in terms of the technology of your backend, as long as it adheres to REST API standards. And of course, you can create different data providers for different types of data. Or not different types, but different structures of data. And as far as what we're going to do for our backend, instead of setting up a complete REST API using Express or whatever, we're going to use JSON-Server. And if you've never used this before, I think you're going to like it. It's fantastic for prototyping REST APIs. Basically, you just have a JSON file, but you have complete CRUD functionality, so you can create, read, update, delete. You can send post and put and delete requests. You can filter, paginate, sort, basically everything you would get in a real full-featured REST API, except authentication. It doesn't have like protected routes or anything like that, at least as far as I know. And I've used this for quite a while. So that's what we'll be using. We're going to set that up, and then we're going to basically connect React Admin to that. We'll also need to install Material UI, which is a UI library for React. I actually have Adrian doing a Material UI crash course. So I should say he already did it, and it's going to either be the video before this or the video after. I'm not sure what order I'm going to upload them in, but he goes in depth into the different components and stuff. So definitely check that out. So let's get started here. I'm going to jump into VS Code, and I just have an empty folder called React Admin Example, and I'm going to open up my terminal. And before we even touch React and get started with that, let's set up our JSON server. So I'm going to just npm init and just do -y here, so I don't have to answer any questions. And that's just going to create our package.json. And then from here, let's npm install JSON-server. And you can install this globally as well, and you can run it globally, but we're just going to create an npm script for it. So under scripts, let's say server, and let's get rid of this, and we want to run JSON-server. We want to -- watch a file called db.json. That's where our data is going to be held. Now, by default, this runs on port 3000, and we don't want that because React, the dev server, when you use Create React App, that runs on 3000. So I'm going to add the port flag and set that to 5000. So let's go ahead and just save that, and we should be able to just create our data and then run the server. So I'm going to create a db.json in the root here, and this is just going to be a very simple JSON file. So as far as your, I guess you could call them your collections, you can put those here. So we'll have posts, which will be a JSON array. I'm also going to have users. We're not going to have authentication, but I'm just using users as a resource. And of course, you could implement JSON web tokens or whatever with React Admin. In fact, I believe it says right here, so supports any authentication provider, so REST API, OAuth, basic auth. Maybe I'll get into that in a different video. So posts, let's go ahead and just add a couple posts here. I'm going to have an ID. You can use whatever fields you want. I'm just going to have an ID, a title. Title will say post 1, and a body. We'll say this is the post body, and then I'm just going to have we'll do a published at and say 10/1/2020. All right, so I'm just going to copy this down 2 more times. So we have 3 posts total. And for the second one here, I'll just change the ID to 2, change the title to post 2, and down here, let's change that to 3 and post 3. And then for users, I'm just going to add 1 user, which is going to have an ID and a name. Let's say John Doe, and an email. So john@example.com. All right, so I'll save that, and that's going to be our starting data. Now we will be able to make like post requests and add new posts or users or whatever. So let's run the server with npm run server, and you'll see it's watching. So anytime I make a request, it's going to show here, kind of like how the Morgan middleware does, or any logging middleware really. So let's go into, I'm going to jump into Postman now. Oh, you don't want to see that yet. So you don't have to do this. I just want to show you that this actually works. So if I hit HTTP 5000/posts with a GET request, you'll see I get my 3 posts. Okay, if I hit users, I get my 1 user. But what I want to show you is I can also make a post request. So I'll go post, and in the body I'm going to send raw JSON data, and it'll create the ID automatically, just like a normal database would. So I don't need to put an ID. Let's just put a title for the post, say post 4, and let's put the body, and let's put the published at, say 10/2/2020, and let's go ahead and send that. So that's a post request, and I get back a status of 201, which means created, and the new post, and you can see it actually gave it an ID. And if I go to my db.json, that new post is going to be there. And I can also do puts, I can do deletes. You can see all the requests down here with the status codes. So JSON Server is definitely just one of my favorite tools to work with. It makes things really easy when you just need to prototype a simple REST API. So now we want to get React set up. So I'm going to stop the server here with Control-C, and I'm going to use npx to run create React app, and I'm going to put this in a folder called client. So everything that has to do with React is going to go into the client folder. Okay, so all of our React files are in the client folder. Now, there's a couple things I want to do before we run React. I want to go into client and then the package.json. And since we have our API running on port 5000, I'm going to add a proxy here. Okay, make sure you're in the client side, the React package.json, and let's set the proxy to our server URL, which is http localhost port 5000. Okay, and we'll save that. And the next thing I want to do is, instead of going cd into client and then npm start to run it, I want to add a client script here. So client, and we're going to set this to npm start. Now that runs the React dev server, but we have to be in the client folder, so we want to add a prefix of client, or whatever you call that folder. And then we should be able to run from here, npm run client, and that will start the React dev server, and it should open up on 3000. Now the backend, or the API, is not running right now. It's just the React server. So I'm going to once again just stop this with Control-C, and I want to have another script that'll run both of these at the same time. I could just open up 2 terminals and do it, but I'm going to use something called concurrently. If you've taken any of my Udemy courses, my Node course, or any of my Mern courses, I use this all the time. So I'm going to create a script here called dev, and I want this to run both the server and the client. So we're going to run concurrently, and then we have to escape double quotes, and then npm run server, another escape quote, and then another / quote, and then npm run client, and then an escape quote and then one final double quote at the end. So if we run that, we should be able to run both at the same time. So npm run dev. Okay, so it opens up React. Now let's go to, I'm going to go back to Postman and just test this again. So I'm going to make a GET request to posts, and you can see I get my 200 OK, and my API is running. So we have both the front end and our JSON server back end running at the same time. Good. So in React, so in the client folder, I just want to do some cleanup. So in the source folder here, I'm going to get rid of app CSS, app test, logo SVG, and setup tests. So we're going to delete those. And then in app.js, I'm going to get rid of the logo and the app CSS imports, and we're going to get rid of everything inside of this div right here. And for now, we'll just say hello. And if we look at in our browser, we should just see hello. Okay, now we have some stuff to install on the front end. So I'm going to just open up a new terminal here, excuse me, and I'm going to cd into client. And let's npm install react-admin. We also want to install the data provider, which is ra-data-simple-rest, and then also material UI, which is at material-ui/core. So make sure you install these in your client folder. So now that those are installed, let's go to our app.js. I'm just going to clear this up and make this a little smaller. So in our app.js, I want to bring in a couple things from React admin. We want admin and then resource. Okay, because obviously you can have more than one resource. You might have products, users, posts, orders, whatever it might be. And we want to bring this in from React admin, and we also want to bring in our provider, our REST provider. So let's import REST provider, and that's going to be from ra-data-simple-rest. Okay, and then down here we don't need to return a div. We just want to return admin from React admin, and we want to pass in here as a prop the data provider, and we want to pass in here REST provider and wrap in whatever the URL to our API, which is going to be HTTP localhost port 3000. Now you might be saying, why 3000 and not 5000? Well, we added a proxy in the package.json, so it's going to proxy to 5000. All right, so that's all we need there. Now inside here we want to put a resource, and resource is going to take in a bunch of things. One is going to be the name. So this is going to be the resource for posts. And we're going to have a list component called PostList. Okay, so we have to create this. Let's bring it in. I know we haven't created it yet, but we will in a second. So import PostList from, and then we'll go into components, which we'll create in a second, and then PostList. All right, so we'll save that, and let's go to our source folder in the client and create a components folder. And inside components, we're going to create a PostList.js. Okay, and I'm going to just generate an arrow function component. Of course, you can use any style that you want. And then we're going to bring in a bunch of stuff from React admin. Okay, so first thing I want to bring in here is a list, and which is going to be basically the wrapper for this component, and we want a data grid. So data grid, and it's a lowercase g. That kind of messed me up. I usually mess it up and put it uppercase, so just make sure it's lowercase. And then a text field. And what this whole thing is going to be is basically a table with all of our posts, and it will show whatever fields we want. I know we don't have many. We have an ID, title, body, what else, and published at, so we can choose from those. The published at is a date, so I'm going to bring in the date field, and I also want to have an edit button here, so edit button, and also a delete button, so we can edit and delete posts. And inside post lists, we'll pass in any props that are going to come in, and for the wrapper element here, it's going to be a list like that, and then we just want to pass in here an object, and we want to spread across all of our props. Okay, now within this list, we're going to have our data grid. And inside the data grid, we put any fields that we want. Fields, buttons, whatever. It's basically like the table columns. So the first column I want to have is the ID. So I'm going to use text field. And what we do is pass in a source prop and set that to whatever field we want, which in this case, it's going to be ID. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy this down 2 more times. The next one is going to be the title of the post. And then this one is going to be published at, except instead of text, I'm going to use a date field. All right, and then underneath that, I just want to have the edit button. Now the way this works is we pass in a base path. So for this to work, at least using the data provider we're using, you want to have just a standard REST API. So a GET request to /post will get all the posts. If you make a put request to post/ID, that's going to be an update. If you do a delete request to post/ and then the ID, that's going to be a delete. So here we just need the base path, which is going to be /posts, and it will work. It'll just work. So this will be our delete button, and again, just pass in the base path. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we already brought it in here, and we're passing it in here. So let's take a look. Okay, so you can see kind of the outline of the UI here. We get this little sidebar. So any resource you add is going to show in this sidebar. You can also export like as CSV, comma separated values or whatever. You can implement authentication. So there's a logout here. We don't have authentication, but that might be something I could look at into doing another video on. Now we get no results found, and I just want to show you that if I open up right here, so this error, the content range header is missing in the HTTP response. The simple REST data provider expects responses for lists of resources to contain this header with the total number of results to build the pagination. So your server needs to have this content range value. I'm actually going to move this over here. So it needs to have this content range value. Now we don't have we're not using Express where we can just go in and add the header, but with JSON Server you can actually use middleware. So if I search for middleware, you'll see right here, add middlewares. We can create a function that takes in request response next, and we can do whatever we want in this piece of middleware and then just call next. Now to implement it, where we actually call JSON Server in our NPM script, we can simply add the middleware's flag and then any files that we want to include. So what we're going to do is add a middleware file. So you want to be outside of your client in the root here. And I'm going to create a file called, we'll call it range.js. And we want to say module.exports. So we're exporting a function that's going to take in request, response, and next. And whenever you have middleware, you want to call next at the end to just keep the request response cycle moving. And then all we want to do here is just set the content range header value. So we can take our response object and call header and pass in whatever header we want to add, which is going to be content range. Now for this, let's say, in quotes here, let's say posts. So normally what you would do if you had like an Express server, you were working with, let's say, MongoDB, you would want to see how many total posts you had in the database, because this is how the pagination is going to work in React Admin. Now we don't have the ability to do that, so I'm just going to say let's get 0 to say 0 to 20 out of 20, I guess. So it'd be something like that. So I'm going to save that. Now in order for this middleware function to run, we have to go to our package.json and go in our server here, our server script, and add --middlewares, and then where that file is located, which is in the same directory, so just range.js. And you can put other ones here as well if you had some other middleware file. All right, so we'll save that. Now you're gonna have to restart the server, so let's go here and just Control C and run npm run dev again. And now this should go away when this reloads, and we should see our posts. Yep, so now we can see our posts, and it says 1 through 10 of 20. Again, it's just a number that I threw in there, but normally you would check that in your database. Okay, and if we look at our network tab here and we look at posts, we can see the response, which obviously is the 4 posts in the header. We get 200. Get requests, the content range, so that was put in there from that middleware file that we added. All right, now if I click edit, that's not going to work because we haven't created the PostEdit component yet. However, delete should work because it's just going to make a request. In fact, I'll show you. We'll take this post 4 and click delete, so it goes away. It says we get a little notification down here, and if we look at the requests, so it first deletes it from the UI and then it makes the request to the back end, which is, I think it was this, yeah. So it was a delete request to this right here, post / and then the ID, and we got a 200 response back with just an empty object. So we have delete functionality, and like I said, edit's not going to work. If we click delete here, that will also work. We don't have an add button either because we need to add that component as well. So let's jump back into React. So close that up. So we have our post list. That's all set. We can close that. And in our app.js, we're going to want to pass into resource now. Let's do create next. So we have lists. Let's add create, and we're going to set that to a component that we create called PostCreate. So up here, let's bring in PostCreate, and we'll save that. And inside components, let's create a new file called postcreate.js. So for this file, this is going to be pretty easy. Let's sketch out a component here, and let's bring in from React admin. We want to bring in a few things. This is going to be different because this is a form. So we want create, which is like the wrapper element, and then we're going to use something called simple form, which does just that, allows us to create a simple form. We want a text input for the title and the body, and we want a date input for the date, for the published. And this is going to take in props, and then our wrapper element here is going to be the create element, and this can take in a title, which I'm just going to say create a post, and also pass in this object here we want to spread the props, and then inside here we want our simple form element and a text input. So this is going to take a source just like the text fields do, and this is going to be the title. Okay, and then we'll have another text input for the body. And since this is a body, it's going to have more text, so I'm going to add the multi-line prop here, which will allow us to have multiple lines. And then let's do the date input. So date input will take in a label, and this is all in the documentation too. And we'll say publish. We'll just say published, and then a source. So our source is going to be the published at field. And that should do it. I'm going to save that, and let's go back here, and notice we now have this create button. So there's very little work we have to do to get some really cool functionality. So I'll click create, it takes us to a form like this, and here let's just say post 4. This is the body for post 4. And then we have a little date picker here. We'll go ahead and choose today and save. And there we go. So post 4 gets added. So we now have that functionality. Let's do the edit now, because right now this doesn't do anything. So back in our app.js here, we're going to pass in just like we did list and create, we're going to pass in edit. And for that, we're going to have a post edit. We'll want to bring that in. Okay, so we'll save that, and let's copy PostCreate, actually. Copy everything here, and then create a new file in components called PostEdit.js. And we'll go ahead and paste that in. So I'm going to change this create right here to edit, and we want to change the name here and here to PostEdit. And the other stuff we're bringing in, we're going to keep that. We're going to change this wrapper to edit, and let's change the title to edit post. And then this stuff here is going to stay the same. Now we could also put the ID, but obviously you don't want people to change the ID, so what we'll do is we'll just add disabled to this. That way you can see the ID, but you just can't edit it. Alright, so let's save that, and let's go back here. I'm just going to reload this. So if I click on edit for post 1, it'll take me to that form. We can see the ID, we just can't edit it. Save is disabled because I haven't changed anything. If I say this is the post body for, you'll see as soon as I start typing, save is now enabled. So I'm going to save that, and we get element updated. So just to make sure, if we go back to edit here, this is the post body for post 2. Okay, we'll go ahead and just change it back. Good. All right, so we can now create, read, update, and delete posts. And not only that, but we can export as a comma-separated value list. So you'll see I hit export, we get this post CSV. I'll go ahead and open that, and there we go. So we can do that. If you want to add another resource, you could go into your app.js file and basically just duplicate this and change this to whatever resource you want, like users, and you could have a user list, user create, and user edit. You could put all these in the same file if you wanted to, if you didn't want to have as many files, and then basically just copy that and change all these instances of post to user. And then in components, create a user list.js and just copy what we have in PostList. You could even create like an abstraction, kind of a wrapper component, so that you don't have to create all these different lists and all these different edits and so on. But this is just to give you an example. So I'm going to change this to user list, and we have different fields. So let's show the ID, let's show the name, and the email, which is text field. Unless there's an email field, let me just check, I'm not sure. Oh, there is, I didn't even know that. So we'll use email field for that, and change this to email. And these should be changed to users. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Delete button. Oh, I forgot my comma. Let's actually move that up. Cannot resolve components user create. That's because we haven't created it yet. So let's create users create, or user create.js. And I'm going to copy PostCreate. We'll paste that in, and we just want to change the title here and here to user create, and we'll say create a user. We don't need the date input, we'll get rid of that. We'll get rid of this, get rid of the multi-line, and just change this to name and email. All right, and then the last one we want is user edit. So let's create a new file called user edit.js, and I'm going to copy post edit. So I'll grab that and go to user edit, paste that in. Let's change that and that to user edit, edit user and keep the ID. We'll change this to name. We'll change this to email, and we'll get rid of the multi-line, and we'll get rid of this date input. We don't need that, and we don't need to bring that date input in either, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, so let's go back and check it out, and now we have automatically we have this users, and if I click on that, we'll see the user we have with the name, the email. So we can edit, change it to like John Smith, save, updates it. We can create a new user. And save. So it creates the user, brings me right to the edit page, has the ID. There we go, we see our new user, we can delete the user, good. So quite a bit of functionality here for a very little amount of code. And obviously you would want to add some kind of authentication, and like the documentation says, you can use REST API, JSON Web Tokens, you can use something like OAuth. So really cool. I just wanted to kind of give you guys, I guess, like a crash course or an overview of how to implement this, and you could use this with just about any REST API or GraphQL API. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.